And if you, there you go. We have started the recording. Welcome everyone. I want to jump into this because it is a lot. I know it's a lot, but I want to give you everything I can possibly give you and hope something that we go over works for you today. So welcome to Be the Storm, which is about challenging all of your, oh wait, my gift's not working. Okay, now it's Be the Storm, challenging all your students in your social studies classroom. I am your host, Joy Hatcher. I'm the social studies program manager. I have here with me Jennifer Zumberas. Jennifer, you want to unmute and say hi?
Hey.
Jennifer is my teammate, and she'll be monitoring the chat with us if you have any technical problems or if you're going to respond. There's a lot of, if you know me, there's a lot of participation in this. My email is here. I've already posted this PowerPoint to the shared folder, and you will get a link to that after the session today, as well as a link to the recording. So here we go, jumping in. This session is about rigor. And we all know that rigor is necessary for anyone to grow, and we want to make sure our kids have that rigor. But that can be different for each student, right? When I say rigor, we mean two things. We mean either they are having a constructive struggle or a destructive struggle. We want to aim for all of our students to have a constructive struggle, which means that the work is challenging, but they have the supports that they need to accomplish the task. What we don't want is for them to have a destructive struggle, which means the work is challenging and they either don't have the knowledge, they don't have the skill, or they don't have the supports to do the task. And you know that's going on in your classroom if you see a kid with their head down or on their phone or being disruptive, or maybe they don't even show up to class, right? So this session is about making sure that every activity that you have is presenting a constructive struggle to each of your students. That also does not mean making a different lesson plan for every kid, because nobody's got time for that, right? You got 150 kids, you can't have 150 lessons. So what we need to do is take the activities that you have, the lessons, the sources that you have, and let's see how we can adapt them slightly in a few different directions to make them challenging for every student. And you can see in my fabulous image over here, every student on that image has some kind of support, but some of those students don't have the supports that they need in order to be successful at the task, like the two kids at the end, right? So that was my little picture for you. So who is this session for? It is to support you as an instructor, as an educator. It's to support your kids who are gifted learners. It's to support your kids who English is their second language, they're English learners. It's to support the students with disabilities and the students without disabilities. So what we're going to go over today covers all of that range of students in your ecosystem. So here's our agenda on Becoming the Storm. You get a little Marvel reference there. First, we're going to talk about getting on the same boat in terms of rigor, which we've done a little bit. The second, we're going to talk about why SWIRL. Then we're going to talk about the bits and pieces of SWIRL. So first, speaking and listening together, and then strategies for reading and writing together, and then illustrating the power tool. Not like we're not going to draw a power tool, but illustrating is the power tool. And then we're going to go over just a brainstorm of different activities that do these things together. And hopefully we'll have enough time to get to all of that. So before we get started, and here's your first activity, I want you to think, and you can type in the chat if you want, or you can write it down silently on a paper or in your head. But I want you to think, what are all the things that you consider when you plan your lessons? When you go to sit down to design your lesson for next week or tomorrow, what are all the things that you consider when you're doing that lesson design? 30 seconds, go. Jennifer, you got my timer? That's okay, I got my timer.
I do, I've got it.
Okay, good. I'll let you have it then. And while you guys are thinking, Vanessa, I want to say that I've had ELs for a good bit the second half of my career. And one of the things I realized that was a real aha moment for me was when the kids came up to me after class and said, "Miss Hatcher, we really love your class, but you talk too fast." And it was like because they have to hear me in English, translate it, and it takes them longer than I was giving them to slow down. So I feel you. They need to feel the love and feel like they can come to you and say, "Hey, can you please slow down?"
You're good on time, Joy.
Okay, so anyone want to share? What do you consider when you sit down to build a lesson? What are you thinking about? I see standards-based skills, engagement of students, the student makeup, materials, standards, objectives, providing choice. Yes, gifted group. Okay. Oh, you know what I didn't do is I didn't share my sound. We're going to watch this little video. If you have seen it before, it's a short video, tiny, tiny video. If you've seen it before, think of it as a close read. But I want you to think about planning your lessons as it relates to this video. And Jennifer, let me know if you can't hear. Please.
Hi, my name is Shelley Moore, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. As Canadians, we have a reputation for finding and embracing the strength in our diversity. This value, however, hasn't been reflected in our classrooms, which still segregates students by ability, especially students with developmental disabilities. There's a gap in our understanding about what we know inclusive education to be, philosophically, versus what we understand and the importance of understanding inclusion in our practice. This is the question I'm trying to answer in my research, is how can we find the value in the day-to-day practice in our classrooms in terms of inclusive education? So how am I going to explain this to you? Now I can sit here and try and describe this, or we could have a little bit more fun. Why don't we go bowling? So let's talk about bowling. You have 10 pins, you have 2 balls, and you have a lane. The goal is to knock down as many pins as you can. But if you don't get them all, it's okay because you have another chance. But when I bowl and roll the ball down the middle and I don't knock them all down, what often ends up happening to me is that there's 2 pins left standing on either end and they stare at you. It's the 7-10 split and it's the hardest shot in bowling. How is bowling like teaching? The ball was the lesson, the pins are the kids. We aim for the middle, we do the best we can. The pins that are left standing, we often have another chance to kind of get to them, but at the end of the day, those 2 pins that are staring, looking at you, are kids who need the most support and are kids who need the most challenge. So we end up choosing one, and the other one is left standing. I just took all the fun out of bowling. Now, I don't know how many times you've watched professional bowling, but I spent an afternoon watching professional bowling, and let me tell you, there was not one bowler who rolled that ball down the middle of the lane. They throw the ball down the lane at a curve. And I was actually really curious about this, so I called up a professional bowler. He was so excited. I don't think he gets a lot of calls about education. He said the reason why the ball has to enter at a curve is because you will knock down more pins and create a bigger domino effect if you enter at that angle. But in order to do that, you have to change your aim. In order to knock down the most pins with one shot, he aims for the pins that are the hardest to hit. Now let's just let this sink in for a second. We are taught to teach the head pins. We are not taught to teach to the kids who are the furthest and the hardest to get to. The kids with autism, the kids with Down syndrome. The part that's critical here, and it really aligns with Universal Design for Learning, is that so often the supports that we design for those kids on the outside of the lane are actually supports that all of the kids need. This is the part we need to understand if inclusive education is going to move forward in Canada. How can we find this value of diversity in our classrooms between the students? This is not just important for the outside pins, but it's critical for every single one of us. And just think, all we need to do is change our aim. Look how bowling changed education.
All right. So quick snippet, the last 7 years, I was teaching at a school that had a high population of English learners. And so I kind of adjusted my aim to meet the needs of these kids. And many of them were refugee kids. And so the difference being they've only been in the country for a few months and they don't speak a whole lot of English. And so I ran to my ESOL team and I was like, help. And they said, Joy, you need to swirl every day. And I said, okay, well, tell me what that means. And they said, that's speaking, writing, illustrating, reading, and listening. And that builds fluency in the students. And so what I realized, similar to this video, is that when I created that space in my lessons for students to do all of those things, it didn't just help my English learners. It helped my students that had accommodations. It helped my gifted learners. It helped it helped everybody, right? Because it's what kids are doing in the classroom. So SWIRL builds fluency and allows students to practice at all the different methods of communication, some of which even gifted students struggle in. So it meets everybody's needs and kind of works on reaching that challenge. So this is the Social Studies Look For document, which I hope everyone is familiar with. It is basically the best practices in social studies instruction as translated by us from the C3 frameworks, the College, Career, and Civic Life frameworks published by the National Council for the Social Studies. So the second piece in that is SWIRL, because that's what kids are doing in the classroom with the source material, with the questioning. And it's an integral piece of all of that framework. So we're going to start talking, well, we're going to talk more, here's some more SWIRL. So it builds fluency, it gives students voice and identity, it addresses the different learning styles. This is the reason I picked this picture in the center with a letter on each box. Who's doing the lifting there? It is not the teacher, it's the student, right? And that's what we ultimately want at the end of the day, is not to be exhausted because the students have done the majority of the work. And it does create that student-centered classroom, and it's perfect for using with diverse source sets, which we encourage as part of social studies instruction. So the first two I'm pairing together because in order to have an activity where students are speaking or saying what they are thinking, you almost can't have that without the listening piece, right? You have to have students saying what they think, but also students receiving that and thinking about what the other person said. So I want to take 15 seconds for you to read that quote from Vygotsky, and then we will move on. 15 seconds, go. I assume that's 15 seconds. It's good enough for me. I want you to think about that quote as we move into the first set of activities. And before we move into speaking, which we're going to do first, the other thing I wanted to mention is that right above that quote, speaking and listening need to be intentionally modeled by you, the teacher, right? If you are struggling facilitating discussions or debates in your classroom, then it is probably a good idea to back up and model that activity first. So think alouds are the first strategy that I use in the classroom. I cut out little, I printed these little types of think alouds, really sentence starters, and taped them on the desk the first year. And the second year I didn't do that because then you have to scrape up all the tape. And then after like a month, the desk is gummy. And so I didn't do that anymore. So then I had them kind of cut it out and put it into their notebook so that while they were having a discussion, and I separated speaking strategies, by the way, into discussion, discourse, and conversation as one, and debate as another, because to me, they really should be separated and we need to start with discussions. So as we are reading a source, as we are watching a video or analyzing a photograph, I would model first what I'm thinking as I'm reading, what I'm thinking as I'm watching the video. And I would focus on 1 to 2 of these think aloud skills at a time, not more than that, because that opens the door to too many things and kids get overwhelmed and then they just stop. And then I would only practice 1 at a time as well. So let's just read this passage and everybody tell me what your questions are. Just find questions, that's it. And then the sentence starter next to it helps them, the students who need help, saying the question that I have is, so that's the first thing. The second thing is giving them open-ended questions, questions that have a multitude of responses. So when I was at the alternative school, the first month or so, maybe a little less, I couldn't get anybody to participate because these kids had always failed at social studies. And I realized it's because we have a tendency to ask questions that there is an answer to. There is a definite answer to. When did this happen? Where did this happen? What are the four causes of? There's a right and wrong answer to all of those. And those kids knew they were going to be wrong. And so they just didn't even bother. So when I changed the way I asked the question to even maybe, who do you think was the best leader in this time period? Or what do you think the most important cause of this war was? They were much more willing to participate because there wasn't a specific answer that I was looking for. They always had to prove their answer. So they could say, if I said, what was the most important cause of World War I, they could say imperialism, but you've got to prove it, right? Why do you think that? And when you open the door to tell me what your opinion is, you almost can't shut it. So it increased participation in the class, and it allowed them the freedom to have deeper discussions. So asking questions that are open-ended, allow for multiple opinion, multiple answers, giving them sentence starters like the think alouds, modeling those think alouds, and then starting with small group, even pairs, and then small group, and then large group, and then structure the discussion. Making sure to give explicit feedback. And I had to model explicit feedback about what they're telling me. So when you say to a student, where do you think the next world war will occur? And they say, well, I think it's Korea. You have to, because that's going to be where they end, whatever place it is, asking them those follow-up questions and then providing them feedback. I like that you thought of this place. Next time, I'd like you to connect your response to something we studied in class, whatever it is. Always starting with a glow and then a grow, which is my format. It doesn't have to be yours. My kids were always in need of affirmation before constructive criticism. So when I'm looking for things to critique, I generally have a long list, but I also can't give them that list. I can give them one or two things on the list. And then the next time that they participate, I'll give them one or two more things. If you give them the whole list of things to correct, again, they will shut down and they won't do it anymore. Even your gifted kids, they're like, no, it's too much. I can't do it. It's too much red on the paper. So giving them one or two areas of focus, then it sounds more like I am helping you grow and less like I'm giving you a grade. So when I'm listening to them, I'm thinking, are they relying completely on visuals that they're giving responses to? Are they relying on what we read and not what someone else said when they're giving feedback? Are they describing and not explaining? Or are they identifying and not describing? How deeply are they thinking? So those are the kinds of kind of categories of things to look for. And then the last one is always, let me think about how they participated last time and how has that changed? Have I seen growth? And then acknowledge that growth. My son actually got in the car today and said his teacher acknowledged after class that he had good responses, and that made him, well, it'll make him participate tomorrow too. That's what it'll do. Also, keep in mind that these are formative assessments for students too. Formative assessments aren't just for us to be able to see growth and adjust our instruction. It's for students to be able to analyze their own performance and take a turn in a different direction, modify, adapt, or grow. So making sure to pose clarifying questions for them and having them to analyze their own thoughts. You did really great today in your responses, in your discussions. I recognize that you acknowledged someone else's response in your response. Where do you think you could go next time? forces them to start asking the question, well, what can I do? What do I think I can do to improve? And they're actually more likely to do it if they came up with the idea. And then they'll even tell you at the end of class, hey, Miss Hatcher, did you see how I did that today? So it takes the burden completely off of you and puts it on them. And then they start to ask themselves those questions without you asking. And they start to listen to their to their peers, to their other group mates, listen to the responses that they're getting and modify their own thinking based on it. So debate is a little bit different. Encouraging civic discourse and respectful debate is a tricky one, especially right now. Everybody, with the pandemic we're all very sensitive, students included. And so being careful and giving them a structure for talking about their opinion or their opinion of somebody else's opinion without talking about somebody else, if that makes sense. Making sure you're saying and modeling, I hear you say this, and I agree with what you said. Not I agree with you. I had to and it might, your kids might be fine with it, but I had to really redirect them and say, you can't say that that person's idea, you can't say that that person is dumb. You have to say that person's idea is unfounded. And in one class, I had to put like butcher paper on the wall. And literally I wrote on one side, when you want to say that's dumb, instead say that idea is unfounded. And you help them, they will help you create the list of things that they want to say. And then you can all work together to create the other list. And then what will happen in the class is they'll get heated and then you'll see them looking on the wall, figuring out which phrase they're going to say. And then they appreciate it and can modify based on that. So encouraging civil discourse and respectful debate by both modeling it and providing kind of prompts. At the bottom, I found some really great prompts that are also linked in the notes for this slide that are ways to agree or disagree with someone else's idea, which you can use both in speaking, also in writing. Using a 4-corner activity where they can hear other people's choices on a matter and make decisions, hear arguments, adjust their argument, make decisions. Jennifer does a really great this or that activity for younger kids where she would say something like, she always does food too. What's better, Dunkin' Donuts or Krispy Kreme? And then they'd have to go to this corner or that corner, and then they would debate it. So 4 corners is very similar, except for it's like, which is the best country to live in, China or Japan? They pick a corner. The 2 alternate corners are, I'm leaning towards China, but I'm not sure. I'm leaning towards Japan and I'm not sure. And then they kind of debate. Each round is a little bit different. The first round is making your argument. And if you're in 6th or 7th grade, that argument could be a geography-based argument. Round 2 could be a political government-based argument. Round 3 could be an economic-based argument. And then as each round ends, the maybe corners can shift. And if they shift, they have to tell you why they shifted. So this is digging back into you're founding your actions on your thinking. So you're shifting from the I'm not sure corner to the absolutely sure corner. Tell me what you heard someone else say that made you change your mind. Providing structure, though, is the biggest thing. Providing structure for the activity, but also for responses to students who might not have that structure built in. So listening strategies go hand in hand, or ear to mouth. I don't know. They're related. Again, providing structure for listening, which was my weakness. I would say, turn to your partner and talk about this. Well, I didn't say turn to your partner and talk about this, and then when your partner is talking, listen for this. And so my activities didn't have as much impact until I attached a speaking and a listening component. So I would say, turn to your partner. You have 1 minute to say what you think is the most important cause of World War II is. And then if you are the listener, I want you to be listening for parts of the argument that are similar and parts of the argument that are different. And again, giving them no more than 2 tasks for speaking or listening, because then it becomes too much. And then after your minute of talking and listening, then you swap, and then everybody has a role. You could do compare contrast, which that was what's similar and what's different from somebody else, what somebody else said. You could have them pull the most important piece of evidence. So when I'm doing, like over here on the right, these inner outer circle discussions, or like speed dating, but not speed dating, like speed dating with classroom discussions, which is kind of this upper right hand corner where the inner circle doesn't move and the outer circle moves every minute or so. Say, you know, this person's going to give you an argument, pick out the one piece of evidence that you think is their best piece of evidence, but then you have to say why it's their best piece of evidence. It also works well when you are in this inner outer circle on the bottom, where the inner circle is the one discussing and the outer circle is just listening. So in the outer circle, you could say, all right, I want you to list the 3 most effective arguers in the inner circle. And then I want you to, or just pick 3 people. And then I want you to put their main idea for their argument down, and then list the evidence underneath. And then when we're done, kind of tally up who you think won the argument or made the best argument. And then you have to explain why. And it could be because this person gave more evidence, but that it could be that that person didn't give as much evidence, but it was more compelling. And what made it more compelling? And then you're getting them to think about this in a format that is less scary, for lack of a better word. Another really important one, and I'll back up for just a second, is this making a connection. I want you to listen to that person's comment, and I want you to make a connection to something that you already know, something that maybe you learned in a previous class, something that has happened to you before, something that you saw on TV, a video game you play. And let me tell you why this is one of the most important ones. Because after I started doing this, my kids would come in and they'd say, Miss Hatcher, I hate you. And I'm like, what? What happened? And they said, I went to go see a movie last night, and all I could think about was how it was just like what we had talked about in class the other day. And it didn't have anything to do with history. It was like once I made them start making connections in short discussions and in the lectures, and we did it consistently through the year, they couldn't stop doing it. And that's delightful for me. One kid was like, I was at the barbershop the other day and I saw a poster on the wall and I just cussed your name. Mutual responsibility. This is another one of my favorite. I am cheap with my time and my money. And mutual responsibility was when you put them in pairs or in small groups and you say, you're all going to get a chance to speak and listen. And then at the end, we're going to have a whole group discussion. And when I call on you, you cannot share your comment. You have to share a comment from someone in your group or your partner. So what that did is even kids who didn't have a response were listening, because they were like, you better say something, because if I get called on, I'm not going to have nothing to say. It also helped them to learn each other's names, because they would have to point out this person and they would have to use their name in order to say whose idea it was. So that one is really quick and you can use it all the time. And then even when I don't tell them it's going to happen, after I've done it a few times, I'll call on somebody and I'll say, well, that's nice, but what was his idea? So then they just learn to constantly be in a state of attention to what everyone is doing. Here's Think Wonder is a listening strategy that is adapted from, Jennifer, is it Library of Congress or the National Archives? I always mess them up.
They both do a very similar one, so I'm not exactly positive. They all hit the same things.
Which is why it's why I confuse them all the time. So I think it's the Library of Congress has a document analysis sheet, and it says, what do you see, what do you think, and what do you wonder? And so I thought it would just be easy to say, what do you hear them saying? What do you think about what they said? And what do you wonder? And that's a quick thing. You're going to get into groups. You're going to do hear, think, wonder. And you don't have to do much else after you teach them to do it one time. And then the outer circles, which we have talked about previously. I would also say incorporating note taking is a good idea. I hear in therapy, I don't know this for a fact, but I hear in therapy, when you are with someone else, you say things like, what I heard you say is, and then summarize what that person said. So that is a really good thing to do in the classroom, because, you know, we only have 1 minute, we've both spoken. And so I'm going to clarify what you said. What I heard you say is this, is that accurate? And then maybe they want to take some notes before they present, because they're always going to have to present somebody else's ideas based on what they were listening for. So incorporating note taking, maybe the second or third time you've done one of these listening strategies, is helpful. And that's also helpful because what are they doing when you're lecturing? Or excuse me, what are you doing? What are they doing when you are giving direct instruction? They're listening. What are they doing when you play a video? They're listening. And so getting them to be able to not just copy what is on the PowerPoint, but listen, translate, and summarize or paraphrase is a skill that we need to get into their heads in all of the different styles of learning. Yeah, oh, look, I said encourage paraphrasing twice. I just wanted to bring up oral histories, StoryCorps, and we're getting towards November. StoryCorps has a free app called, well, StoryCorps, it's the StoryCorps app. And it's on Google Play. I think it was on Android too. It's also on the Apple Store. So if you have iPads or whatever, you can use the app. What I love about the app, other than the fact it's free and I'm cheap, is that it walks anyone through creating a good oral history interview. And it also kind of puts parameters on that so that you have timing, you have structure. There are prompts, so they're different categories. And so as you're typing in the title for your interview, you can go through these different categories of questions and kind of select which questions you want. And it'll say, you only have 3 questions. 10 questions is really the best number. It won't make you do 10, but it'll prompt you, or you can create your own questions and type those in. And then when you go to record on the app, you can swipe. So you can read the question off of your phone and allow the person to speak. And so it's recording everything. And when you're done, you swipe to the next question, and it gives some structure to the interview. It downloads as an MP3, or you can also upload it to the Library of Congress to be part of the documentation. Now, the Great Thanksgiving Listen is coming up in November, and they promote that heavily. I will say here's my word of caution. Listen closely when I say this to you. You can't control what adults say to a child. And so please don't dock them, and understand that they don't want to don't just play it for the class. Listen to it first, have them send it to you. So my son in elementary school created an interview for my dad. This is being recorded. Maybe I should not record this. Anyway, he went down and did this interview with my dad. And I swear my dad admitted to like 4 crimes when he was in the Navy. And I was like, no, son, don't press that button. We're just going to save it on our phone. That doesn't need to go to the Library of Congress. So, you know, language, it gets them to appreciate the stories of others. It gets them to think of good follow-up questions. It helps them to build community, but things to be mindful of before you start that kind of activity. Now, in a perfect world, we would stop and do an activity, but I want to kind of really jump in and get going on the next section so we can get to the activities at the end. But I will pause here and ask if there are questions, comments, outrageous objections, or if you have anything that you've done as an activity for speaking and listening that you would love to share. Oh yes, judge's robe and judge's gavel helps them get into the debate, yes. And having them kind of record the evidence. When we did Lincoln Douglas debates, and I would score each round, I would model and say, this round goes to team blue because XYZ. And this round goes to team red because XYZ. So I am verbally giving them the reasons for my analysis, which also helps them to make their own analyses and also helps them build better arguments. Oh, Margie says we did trials. Susan says philosophical chairs is amazing and captures many of the points you made. Susan, what is philosophical chairs?
So philosophical chairs is where, similar to the Four Corners activity that you described, it's an activity that I learned in AVID training. And so students sometimes will research, or you'll look at a couple of different documents and you'll ask that essential question, like practice round that I usually do with kids so they can learn the strategy is, you know, should gun be allowed in school? So if you really, really like that, then you sit on the right. And if you really, really think you're against that, you sit on the left. But the people that are in between have to stand in the back, and you have to practice all those civil discourse skills and mirroring what someone has said. Three people have to talk before the next person can talk again. And so once you made the decision based on other people's input, you can go and sit down on that side. If you hear something that sways you to go to the other side, then you can switch chairs. So it's a very easy and effective civil discourse strategy.
And keep in mind, part of the C3 frameworks we're trying to get at is for kids to make a claim and justify it with evidence. Whatever the claim is, I am shifting from this philosophical chair to that one, and my evidence or my explanation for that is, so tying it back to their listening skills or to the evidence. I like it. I like it. All right, let's jump into reading real quick. Prepping and coding the text. Are we familiar with this? Maybe yes, no, a couple people. Okay, so have you ever given like a handout to a kid and it has a lot of writing and they're like, oh my God. Or you have the kid that says, this is perfect. And they put up the paper and behind the paper is their phone. And they type on their phone, text on their phone, they're on Discord, they're on Snapchat for the first 4 minutes. And the last 1 minute, they skim it really quickly. So what this does is it provides structure for reading a source in a way that it makes it manageable. So prepping and coding the text starts with you, the teacher, saying, all right, we're going to go through and number the paragraphs. You can't get them to number the paragraphs. You have to number the paragraphs with them. So for instance, on this, on the bottom right, this particular article, I would say, all right, everybody see the picture that says votes for women? That's going to be number 1, including the caption below it. Where it says why suffragists wore white and more feminist symbols decoded, that's a number 2. When it says it took more than 150 years for American and British suffragists to gain women's right to vote, that's number 3. Suffragists use visual symbolism to help the public envision a world in which women could participate. That's number 4. From angry cats to women in white dresses, here's your guide to some of the most, okay, that's really tiny, potent symbols of the women's suffrage movement. That's number 5. So we're going through the whole document together, making sure that I say, you see that picture, that's number this. You see that inset, you see that map, that's number this. What does that do for students? You could type in the chat or unmute, either way. By the way, I sucked at wait time in my classroom. I still struggle with it. Thank you. Margie to the rescue. It organizes their thoughts. Yes, it chunks it. So instead of one page with a whole bunch of text on it, there's individual bite-sized pieces now. It helps them to find it quickly. Yes. Have you ever had a kid that says, well, it says XYZ, and you're like, where does it say it? And they're like, you know, over here in this place, in the middle, kind of in the middle. Well, now they can say, in paragraph 10, sentence 2, it says. So it enables them to quickly cite their source, which is something they use both in the GMAS, AP, IB, all of the things, right? So citing the source quickly. And when they say in paragraph 10, guess what magically happens? Every student goes to the same paragraph 10. So it chunks it for them. It makes it more manageable and structured. And I read the first sentence of each section or each paragraph. So we also previewed the text. So they have an idea from beginning to end about what the text is about. The second piece of prepping and coding is the coding. So now, after we have prepped the text, I want them to go through and identify specific things. In this instance, I want them to identify things that are they believe is a social or cultural belief and a political belief. And when they do, they have to underline it and then put the code, which is S and P, and then they have to explain what it is. So over here, I have highlighted purple meant loyalty, and I have coded it P. Now they can't just code it, they have to tell you why they coded it. So I said voting rights imply loyalty to country, which was important to show. So purple meant loyalty, I coded as P for that reason. I might also ask students who can code that C. Who can code that same text as the other code, just to show, connecting back to our one of our first strategies, making sure that kids know that there's multiple answers to the same question. This shows that you can take the same exact text and code it in two different ways, or code it the same way for two different reasons. So I don't know if you guys use Sprite or Persia or Praise. It's an acronym that I use. There's a lot of information in social studies. So I helped them organize it by giving them categories. So in Sprite, S is social cultural, P is political, R is religion, I is either interaction or intellectual, depending on the time period in history or the place I was studying. T is technology, and E is economics. So, and pretty much anything, any piece of information, any thought can go in multiple categories. So that was also an activity. Where would you put this in Sprite? Okay, you put it in political. Who can tell me how it could go in economics? So just another way to organize information. Yet praise, political, religious, aesthetic. Ooh, Vanessa, tell me about aesthetic. What do you mean?
So at our local university, Columbus State University, where I'm at, they have this Ivy Center that does what's called the cultural approach to history. And they use those lenses to kind of study a time period or an event or whatever. And so aesthetic can be including the music, the poetry, the artwork, kind of incorporating that into the time period or event that you're studying.
So it's the arts piece. Nice. I like it. Cool. See, we all use different things, and they're all equally awesome. I use praise. I use agriculture, but I was teaching world history, and so we put art in cultural or religion, depending on its purpose. So again, there's not a right or wrong answer. It's whatever works for your kids. The second is annotation skills. I use prepping and coding the text if I want to them to look at specific aspects of something. I want them to look at the economics of trade and the cultural impact. Then I'm just going to have them do S and E for coding. But if I just want them to analyze a work in general, then I might use annotation. And I used 5 annotation skills. There are many more, and your ELA team might have different ones. But I used I wonder, the hashtag for connections, circling unfamiliar words, starring important details, and they don't actually draw a thought bubble for visual connection. They just underline what it is, draw a line, and illustrate whatever the visual connection is. So I would teach them one strategy of annotation a week and not more. So when we had whatever source it was on week 1, all I would have them do is go through the document, go through the image, and tell me what they wondered. What questions did you have? And of course, they had that think alouds prompt. So if they were stuck, they could go to that and say, oh, well, a prediction. I wonder why. So I just had them do I wonders first, and then I had them do unfamiliar words. Now with unfamiliar words, they had to circle the word they were not familiar with, and obviously it could not be every word. So sometimes you have to say the ones that you are most unfamiliar with, but they can't just circle it. They have to draw a line and tell me what they think it means in context. So they're not just circling everything and saying, oh, I didn't know it because I don't know the words. Oh, well. I'm still expecting you to give me a guess of what you think it is. And if that's not what it is, it's fine, because you said you didn't know what it was. Important detail, again, they have to tell me why they think it's important detail. What makes this important and not just another fact? And then a visual connection is probably the last one I would work on, is because the students struggle to take something that is text and turn it into something that's visual. And I would absolutely model that first. Here's my example here with a non-text source. This is the unemployment rates in 2019 as it relates to education. And I always got this question in my econ class, and so I continue to have it right here at bachelor's degree. This is the average weekly earnings of someone with a bachelor's degree. And my cue for my wonder is, I wonder why teachers make so much less than the national median who have a bachelor's degree. I always thought that was an interesting thing. And then I put a star for important detail on the source note, because this is only full-time workers included in this, not part-time workers. So then I wondered, what is considered full-time and what is part-time? What if I had 2 part-time jobs that equal to full-time? Can you do that? I don't know. Are they included? But these are the questions that I'm asking and I'm including on the thing. So with their annotation skill, once they've learned each one, I would give them 2, maybe 3 at a time, but generally just 2 for each source. And this is habits of good readers, right? Chunking the text, giving them a predefined words list. If you are not familiar with Rewordify, that is a fantastic website. I would take text, copy it, paste it into Rewordify, and click reword, and it would give me the text in a lower lexile. And I didn't use that as much though. What I did is, when it does that, it also creates a predefined words list. And let me tell you how I don't have time to pick out every single word that I think my kids might struggle with and then give them a definition beside it. But Rewordify does that for you. So what I would do is use that to come up with the, I'll put it in the text for you, in the chat for you. I'd use that to come up with my predefined words list, and I would give that to students who I knew needed it. I am going to pop it in the chat right now. It is delightful. Boom. Okay. Leveled text, which is delightful, and what delightful is apparently the word of the day, is wonderful if you have texts that are leveled. News, ELA, other organizations like that have that, where you can take the same article and make it as a lower or higher lexile. So if you can, that's ideal. Paired reading is great. Whenever I did stations, including 2 different, well, you want to provide different points of view anyway, but if you can do that in a way that has a something that is more challenging and less challenging, pairing heavy text with visuals helps a lot of students, because they can, what they don't get in one, they can get in the other, and then it can transfer. And evaluating information. All of these, and I always started with speaking and listening, because that builds their knowledge and communication skills to move into writing. For the most part, my kids were great speakers and maybe listeners, not as great with the writing. And I taught AP for a long time. And when you had 150 essays to grade, that's kind of painful. So again, giving them a question to write about that has a multitude of answers is preferable. So you're taking what you're doing with the speaking, asking the questions that have multiple answers, and you're giving those same kind of prompts in the writing exercise. I changed the, do your kids do this when you give them like a test and it has a constructed response at the end? You just like, you hand out the last paper and their hand goes in the air and they say, Miss Hatcher, what do I get? What is the highest grade I can get if I don't answer the constructed response, right? So to begin with, I maybe had 10 or 15% that would even attempt a constructed response. So then I changed the questions to the more open-ended questions, but I first addressed those in the class when we'd have discussions and debates. And then some of those questions ended up in the test. And I swear I went from like 10 to 15% even attempted it to 85% or more attempted it, because they knew that there wasn't a right or wrong answer, and they might be able to, oh, I'm not going to say that. I might be able to fake their way into some points. And or they've heard parts of this, and even if they never participated in the discussion or debate, they were listening to other people's discussion and debate. And so they took those ideas and put them on paper. So that was a huge thing for me. Giving them sentence starters and prompts when they start discussion translate to their writing skills. So the things that you're doing in the speaking and writing are the speaking and listening rather, are supporting the writing through those sentence prompts. And then scaffold the tasks. I couldn't just go, and y'all, this is my failures as a AP teacher for many years, is getting them to bullet first, then shift to sentences, and then connect ideas, and then go into paragraphs, and then go into essays. I mean, and this is the procedure that I would do every year. In some years, I could start off with summary because the kids were already there. But between first period and second period, they might be very different looking exercises, because first period's there, and oh no, my 4 first period babies, they were never, they were already asleep. So we had to start with bullets for first period. But some classes could start at summary and move up. So just knowing where your kids are and scaffolding those writing tasks. So when I did writing relays, which is a group of 3, I never did more than 3, unless I didn't have a choice. Unless there was, group of 1, then you don't have a choice, right? So a writing relay is giving 3 different prompts. Each person in the group has a different prompt. They're all these open-ended ones, and one of them is silly. Like, if George Washington had an Insta account, what would he have posted? Something that's like, even the kid that is grumpy and had a really bad evening or the night before is going to come in and want to write something about. So they get 2 minutes to read their prompt and respond to it. At the end of 2 minutes, the timer sounds and they shift. So I get Vanessa's paper, Vanessa gets Jane's paper, and Jane gets my paper. You have 2 minutes now to read the new prompt, read the other person's response, and I can comment in a multitude of ways. I can either continue writing because I like what Vanessa said, or I think it's something different, so I'm going to write my own. Or I can make comments to Vanessa's, like I did in speaking and writing, and say things like, I really like this evidence you used. You also could use this. Or I can bullet and brainstorm, or it really makes me picture this, and maybe draw a little sketch. Giving them the opportunity to show what they know in a multitude of ways, make sure that even when you get a group that one kid is perceived to be like the smartest and the next kid gets his paper, I'm not putting on anything on their paper because they're going to think I'm dumb. Well, if you give them a multitude of ways to respond in a written conversation like this, then they can maybe create an illustration, they can leave positive comments, whatever, but they're more likely to participate if you give them a multitude of ways, a scaffolded way to participate. And then there's talk to text technology as well. Autocorrect sucks, though, I'm just going to say. And then my voice to text, my Siri, who is probably listening to me, is awful, but it's helpful for some kids. And if their phones know them better than mine does, then it could work. This was another activity that we're not going to do, but you're welcome to think about it when you get the PowerPoint. Illustration strategies, I'm going to go quickly because a lot of these are similar, but to things that we've done in other formats. But I mentioned note-taking, incorporating note-taking in speaking and listening. I mean, it is writing. And with your reading is crucial, because you're connecting all the letters of SWIRL together that way. But don't forget illustration. I told you it's the power tool. Visual journals, and we had 2 sessions last year I did with Jessica Booth, who is the Fine Arts Program Manager, where we gave some easy strategies for you to incorporate visual journaling into your classroom note-taking. Is impactful. I did this the last few years in my classroom, and my kids rode MARTA to school. One time, this one kid left his journal to my class on the bus, and I had to call the counselor to come and speak to him because he was so devastated. because our visual journals were a representation. They weren't just the notes in the classroom. They were their thoughts about the discussion, their thoughts about the image. They were doodles that they were, writing some poem or some music. It was their artwork. It was more than just notes from a class and activities from a class. And I was both devastated for him, but also I had a little tear of joy because you lost the notes from my class and it made you cry. And that made me a little bit happy. I didn't tell him that though. But it really can shift and completely transform the work that your kids do in the classroom if you use visual journals. Using the quadrant structure when you're doing analysis, some of you might have been with the 30-second activity done the 30-second activity with me before. Sometimes if a visual is particularly complex, covering up 3 quadrants and giving analysis time for each piece is helpful. Using graphic novels, which we talked about paired text. Graphic novels is kind of a paired text. There is the actual text and then there's the visual supplement to that. What I found is my gifted students hated them. And originally I thought it was because they thought the comics were for other people, but no, it was because the majority of the story they had to analyze the visuals for, and that was not their strong suit. They were used to reading context from text, and they struggled analyzing the visuals to get a sense of emotion or anger or whatever. So using graphic novels is a great way to pair illustration and text. And read alouds. I am a big proponent of doing read alouds with children's books. They are not just for children. They are frequently incredibly complex, and you have to get this story into this space. And using those to start off a unit helps students to have an anchor to all refer back to during the lesson. Okay. Let's quickly brainstorm some of my favorites. Would you rather? You played that game, right? Would you rather win $1 million tax-free or win 1,000 shares of stock in a company of your choice? This is one of the easiest things to do with your class as a formative assessment. There's not a right or wrong answer. It's what you would choose and explaining why this choice is better for you than the other one. You could do this with economics, geography, history. If you're in 7th grade, you could say, would you rather live in North Korea or South Africa? Would you rather live in China or Japan? Would you rather live in Canada or Australia? You could do this with anything, and then you could say and make sure that you're basing your decision on this domain, on economics. Now base your decision on government. You could do this with world history. I did it with, back in the day when we still taught about the Greek polises. Would you rather live in Athens or Sparta? And the girls in the class initially said Athens, and then as they learned more, they said, maybe I'd prefer to live in Sparta, because they learned more about it. So would you rather, easy one. Yes, Heather did talk about that one. Musical chairs is the same thing put to music. They walk around while the music's on, and when they stop, they have to turn to the person that they are closest to and answer whatever question it is. It could be something like who had the greatest impact on their people, and they had to choose. And so what that does is exposes them to a lot of different people's thoughts on the question and prepares them for a debate or a essay. Concept connections is one of my favorite things to do if my lesson is tanking. And also it is a fabulous homework activity, because all I have to do is come up with 10 terms. They could be 5 terms from today and 5 from yesterday. They could be some from this unit, some from last unit. I can mix in academic vocabulary, but the goal is for students to write a single sentence that contains 2 or more terms from the list that I provide. So The goal for my beginning level kids is to create 5 sentences. For my monitoring level or my on grade level students, it's to create 7. For my gifted or advanced writers, I'm going to ask them to create 5 sentences, but their sentences have to include 3 or more terms. Now, it's very important that you consider the terms that you're putting on that list and make sure that you have several of them that will connect in different ways. You can use a term more than once as long as it's for a different reason. But this is a super easy way to make sure they don't cheat on homework, because you can't. There are no 2 kids who write the same sentence with the same terms in the same way. And if they do, then it's clear that it was not theirs. And the first time you catch a kid doing it, it will be the last time. And you don't have to call them out. You just have to put the 2 sentences on the board and say, I mean, they might write a sentence that means the same thing with the same 2 terms, but they don't use the same words. So this was a great homework activity, and also allowed them, when I put some examples on the board, or when they paired up and shared their best sentence or the sentence that they struggled with the most, it was a way that they could hear how other students structured sentences, and that was helpful to them. We have hexagonal thinking, which is similar, except for you don't pair 1 and 1 in a list. You are taking concepts and kinesthetically manipulating them in a digital space or a face-to-face space to make connections. And every hexagon that the one you place touches has to have a connection, and you have to explain the connection. And I would do that in a verbal way first before I'd move to written. And Ben Smalley, our US History virtual specialist, did that one time. I know I'm running out of time. Think about using visual timelines, giving students or groups just a stack of pictures and saying, put them in order. And what order do you think they go? And why do you think they go that way? And they could be primary and secondary sources. You could do the same thing with a 3-way match with different sources, not just visuals, but visuals, text, books. Here's a stack of 10 sources. Make 3-way connections and explain your connection. Here is the I see, I think, I wonder. It is Library of Congress. Haha. And there's some more that I will leave here for you. The last thing I want to leave you with is to use each other as resources. Use your department, use our virtual communities as resources. When you're in your classroom, make sure that you are, as Jennifer likes to say, checking the weather. Is it too challenging? Remember, the whole topic of this was making sure every student is appropriately challenged, and the work is rigorous for all the students. So keep control of the weather conditions so that it's not too crazy out there. I wanted to share with you one more thing that you may or may not be aware of. This is our program page on gadoe.org. Jennifer, can you put in the link for the feedback form? But on the bottom, I have our social media. And if you did not know, we now have a TikTok account. It is new, but, and you don't have to have an account in order to watch the videos. But what I've done is taken some of what I am doing is taking some ideas that I have, some ideas from our virtual specialists, and putting them into short 1 to 3 minute clips. So it's like a buffet of resources for you on our TikTok account. And we're posting a few a week. I don't know, it takes a long time. So here's some more links to resources to support your learners who need a little extra help. Jennifer is putting our feedback form in the chat. This proves that we were here with you today and not on our couch eating bonbons, which is a great option sometimes. I'm going to stop recording, Jennifer.